Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/Malicious Compliance. In today's episode, you don't want a woman working on your car? That's fine, but you're going to be waiting a long time. Sports bar manager changing the TV. Ignore the red lights and cones at your peril. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. You don't want a woman working on your car? That's fine, but you're going to be waiting a long time. Many years ago, I worked at a car dealership. The attached service garage was small and I was the only licensed mechanic. I would occasionally have issues with male customers. They would second-guess my diagnoses, watch me while I worked on their cars from the bay door, double-check my work in the parking lot, etc. I didn't deal with customers directly and would often get my apprentice to pull cars in and out of the shop for me. This morning in particular, we were busy. The lot jockey and apprentice were occupied helping wash cars for delivery and driving to a customer's house. The service advisor left a work order and keys at the parts counter, and I went out the front through service to get the car. It was in for a service campaign, which was an update done with a scan tool. It takes about 10 minutes. The customer was planning on waiting and was sitting in service. When he saw me with his keys in my hand, he immediately stood up, alarmed. I was hustling, so I walked right by him and out the door. I missed the following conversation, according to the service advisor, also female. Customer: who is that chick? Is she going to be working on my car? I don't want her working on my car. Advisor: the other tech is out at the moment, so it's going to be quite a wait until someone else can look at your car. See, that's fine. I'll wait for a guy. I don't want that chick touching my car. Politely, understood. The advisor comes to let me know, and I pull the car out and put the work order and keys back on the counter, nonplussed. Half an hour passes. The apprentice is still away, and I am happily working on something else, bringing other cars in and out. The customer is now watching each and every person who comes through the door. The high school co-op student comes in to get something signed. The customer's keys are still sitting on the desk. It's been about an hour now. See, hey, why hasn't my car gone in yet? Can't you get this guy to do it? No, sorry. He's just a co-op student, so he is not allowed to drive the cars due to liability and insurance concerns. See, just get someone else to bring the car in and he can do the work. This was supposed to take 10 minutes. Sorry, sir. He's just a high school student doing his co-op, he's not approved to perform warranty work. Only licensed techs and apprentices can do the recall. The car jockey returns. The advisor hands the car jockey a different set of keys, and he brings yet another car into the shop for me. The customer is becoming incensed. See, I've been sitting here for over an hour and I've watched 5 cars go in before mine. My appointment was for 8 a.m., this is getting ridiculous, blah blah blah. At this point, he says that he literally doesn't care who does the recall, but that it has to be a guy. The service advisor starts listing off the names of the men who work in the dealership, then saying why they can't perform the recall. Well, there's Herman, but he's just the car jockey. He doesn't know how to work on cars. Then there's Jeet, but he's about 17. I wouldn't want him doing the recall, personally. I guess we could ask Mike, but Mike is the parts guy, he doesn't know how to use the scan tool. The detailers are men, but they know nothing about cars. The customer is fuming at this point and demands to talk to the service manager. The manager comes out of his office and guides the customer into the garage. He's pretty old school, lights up a cigarette standing at the end of my bay, and points at me. That's my best technician. Those guys take orders from her. You can either wait for her to finish what she's working on, and then you can ask if she's still willing to do your work, or you can take your car somewhere else. The guy was pretty shook up at this point, and he took his car and left 2 hours after he'd first arrived. I don't think we ever saw him again, which was not much of a loss, all things considered. That manager in particular always stuck up for me and took my side. The service advisor has this very deadpan sense of humor. She knew full well it would easily be an hour before the apprentice would return from his errand, and that no one else could do the recall. This was not the first sexist we had encountered. Edit. That manager was called out of retirement to run the department more efficiently and to hire new people. Super soft spoken. We did have trouble finding good techs around that time. I was there for 4.5 years. Also, this was in 2012 or so things have changed a bit since then, I think. He did regularly smoke in the shop, as did the sales guys and detailers, mainly in the winter. He can't fix his car, how the hell can he determine who can? Don't pay an expert and try and second guess them. He couldn't see beyond the massive knob hanging off his forehead. In all of my 65 years on this earth, I have never understood this kind of stupidity. This whole crap idea that any job is gender-related has held the world back for centuries. I don't care who works on something as long as they fix it. Their gender, race, religion, color are all unimportant for getting the job done. I am so tired of stupid bigoted people. Now when you mentioned your age, it makes me think of Queen of England. She was a mechanic during the war and can fix a car. And she is the queen, doing not a bad job, depend on your perspective, for as long as everyone can remember. Would these people doubt her ability? Fellow mechanic here. I can list 3 times just off the top of my head when my bosses didn't stick up for me. That place sounds like a dream. After 12 years, a manager's license, and more than a dozen different shops under my belt, I'm just fed up with this profession. As a mechanic, it should be relatively easy to jump over into marine engineering. Get to work on big-ass engines, and the only people on the ship who might have a problem with your gender will be too afraid to get dropped off at the next port for attitude problems. You have the ability to fix my car, go for it. Hell, assuming you have typical hands, as a woman you could probably reach into tighter spots than a guy could. I'm also in a predominantly male field and holo can handle the bullshit. I sure do appreciate when my boss steps up for me. Sports bar manager changing the TV. I was at a sports bar watching UFC fights on a Saturday afternoon. It was pretty dead until around 5 when the early dinner crowd started arriving. One family came in and asked their waitress if they could switch the large projector screen from the fights. She came over and asked me, and I said it was fine as long as they put the fights on another TV. The family had the main TV switched to ESPN, which had one of their special documentaries on at that time rather than live sports. Then the family asked if they could switch the smaller TV that I had just had switched to the fights. The waitress said no since they'd already requested another TV. The family was annoyed and asked for the manager. When the manager got to their table, the father demanded that the fights be changed so their son, who was probably around 8, couldn't see the fights since they were violent and not family-friendly. The manager tried to calm the family by moving the fights to a TV behind their son, which I would have been fine with. However, the father demanded that the fights couldn't be on any TV as long as the family was at the sports bar. Then he accused the manager of not caring about young children for insisting that the fights remain on somewhere. The manager nodded and said he'd get the TV sorted out. Then he also asked the father if he should change the music playing since it was pop. The father grunted about that being nice, and how the manager was finally being responsible and looking out for children. While this was happening, the manager sent the family's waitress over to put their order in. Then once their order was in the system, the manager switched the TV again. He put the UFC fights back on the main TV, but this time he turned the sound on as well since the pop music could be bad for children. The father started loudly complaining again and called the manager back over. He demanded that the TV be changed again, and when the manager said no, the father demanded to speak to the owner. The manager said he'd get the owner, but it may take a few minutes. The manager changed into a sport coat and came back over. It turned out he was a part owner of the sports bar. Now the father really lost and said his family was leaving. The owner calmly asked if he should have the family's meals changed to takeout orders. The father said they were leaving and wouldn't pay for the food the family had ordered. The owner said the family had to pay for their meals since they were already being cooked. The father continued arguing until the owner threatened to call the cops if they left without paying. The family ended up paying, but left when their food came several minutes later. Until they left, the father made the son sit there with his eyes closed and ears covered so he wasn't exposed to the fight. I busted out laughing once the family left. Takes family to a sports bar where sports are being shown. Freaks out when family is exposed to sports at a sports bar. It seems to me that if I were so concerned about what my 8-year-old son sees and hears, I would not take my 8-year-old son to a sports bar in the first place. But my sons are all grown up now, so maybe I'm out of touch with parenting skills. Oh, he takes him to Hooters for his birthday though. Your parenting skills are on point, so chill. Parents should not go to a sports bar expecting it to be family friendly. I was really hoping the manager was going to refuse to serve alcohol to the table because the child was there after the manager voluntarily asked about the music. I was at the lone hockey bar in my small town once while the CBJ were in the playoffs. It was predictably loud during the game, and as a bonus, the bartender even wore rollerblades and had a team-signed hockey stick with him behind the bar. About 15 minutes before the kitchen closed, an older gentleman in his mid-30s, if I had to guess, daughter walked in and he said, "I'm trying to have a quiet dinner with my daughter, can you turn that off?" The bartender just looked at him, picked up the stick and said, "This is a sports bar, sir." He shut up after that. Interesting, they go to a sports bar and are offended that there's sport, although I think that's a stretch when it comes to boxing, but not my call, on the tellies? No doubt if they'd gone to strip club he'd be demanding the dancers all cover up so as not to offend his child's sensibilities. What a maroon. Why wait to start laughing? They were clearly being very obnoxious in a public setting, so public ridicule is on the table. Would have served them right. Ignore the red lights and cones at your peril. This isn't really my MC, as I was just a slightly hot and grumpy witness, but it just popped into my mind on my home from my shift and I figured I'd post it here. About a decade ago, while I was waiting for my current department to hire, I took a job with a private EMS company as an EMTI on a fast response motorcycle unit, contracted out to our local freeway agency for accident response. It was an okay gig, long hours and riding 300+ kilometers every day killed my love of biking, but it beat the hell out of working on an ambulance. The same agency also staffed pickups with safety crews for the purpose of lane closures and scene safety. While we were a quasi-governmental unit, we had no real authority outside of that allowed to us by the Fire Brigade Services Act and often had motorists ignore our suggestions when it came to not driving through accident scenes. This meant that police units still had to smack peepees occasionally, and it was usually quite fun to watch. I had the pleasure of working the same stretch of freeway as a certain Metro Police motor unit, and I've watched him screw with people a few times. 2 specific times come to mind. The first time I saw this salty old bugger use his powers of shithousery was after a multi-vehicle pileup just after an aggressive bend in the freeway that closed down 3 of the 4 lanes of traffic, causing a line of cars that stretched for a few km back around the bend, meaning that cars at the rear couldn't see what was causing the delay up front. A number of drivers decided that they were too important to wait and drove up the hard shoulder, half on the road and half on the grass to mosey on by the accident scene, leaving the rule-abiding drivers to sit in the hot sun looking at us with dismay. After a few of them snuck by, nearly hitting crews who were busy treating patients and almost taking out a recovery vehicle, this absolute stud of a man got fed up and moved his bike into the shoulder, but in such a way that they weren't able to see him. Every car he stopped got told to park up and wait while he waited for his next victim. After he'd collected a gaggle of about 20 of them, he slowly made his way up the line, ticket book in hand, to have an unhurried chat with each driver individually. Not only did I get to watch each idiot eat an almighty fine for leaving the roadway and ignoring emergency vehicles, they also had the pleasure of sitting there as the scene was cleared before being allowed back into traffic, turning a 20-minute delay into nearly an hour of baking in the noonday sun. There was much gnashing of teeth and mutterings of "Don't you have anything better to do, officer?" While that was pretty funny to me, the best I saw of him was a few months later when we got a call for a scrap metal hauler that was quite impressively overloaded that had managed to roll over while on the two-lane overpass connecting the same national freeway to the city freeway that lead into the industrial area south of the city center. This thing must have been pushing 40,000 kilograms when it wedged itself, nose against the right-hand concrete barrier and tail digging a deep gouge into the counterpart barrier on the left. This meant that there wasn't a ball hair on either side of the truck and traffic was diverted at the entrance to the overpass, around 500 meters up from the scene. I didn't technically need to be there at this point as the driver had been taken to hospital and the road was closed awaiting the arrival of 2 heavy rigs to lift and recover the truck and contents. I was leaning on my Suzuki perving over this officer's BMW R1200 RT when we noticed that the crew of the safety unit at the closure was having difficulty with a vehicle that seemed to think they were above the law and were aggressively trying to get by the pickup, cones and angry men in reflective gear. Seeing this and the potential for injury, he told them to wave the car through. As it zoomed down and then up to us on the top of the overpass, he winked at me, and when they stopped behind the very heavy and very wedged truck, he wandered over to have a chat with the driver, who was apparently the spokeswoman for the force-strong irritation of Karens within. The crux of his chat with her was that he certainly understood their point about needing to get to their highly important destination, but that the road they had elected to use was currently blocked by 40 tons of mangled steel, and he was sure they would agree it would be dangerous for her to drive back against the traffic considering that we had heavy rigs and support vehicles arriving and setting up. He apologized for the inconvenience but directed them to park up by our bikes and wait for the rigs to do their thing, after which we could all be on our merry way. It took about an hour to get the road clear, after which they most definitely weren't making eye contact and appeared like beaten dogs as he finally wished them safe travels on their way. Irritation of Karens. This is good. Going to add this to my grammar book. An argument has also been used. I suppose you can cycle through them, or just use whatever suits the situation best. Why yes, you can come this way, despite the cones and people invest saying you can't, but it will be a little bit of a delay. I don't have the legal authority to prevent you from going this way. However, 40,000 pounds of steel say you can't. Please make your case with that overturned truck over there. Wow. This last story. Something similar happened here in Australia just last month. Truck had rolled at night and they said detours in place. Guy drives through cones, detour signs, and people. Then the best bit happens. Because it's dark, this idiot didn't see the overturned truck and crashed his car into it. Had to be taken to the same local hospital at the truck driver. And I'll be willing to bet that if he actually has insurance, it will decline to cover his self-inflicted collision. I worked as a police officer in a major city. The main excuse I always heard for crossing the flare and cone line when a street was shut down was, "But officer, this is the only way I know to get home." On another note, the speeding by wrecks is why most police and fire departments will block at least one extra lane at an accident. It gives space so you don't have a car going past you 3 feet away at 70 miles per hour, and it slows down the traffic by creating a bottleneck. So, Karen, what is your specialist area of expertise? In what way can you assist with this accident scene? You seemed in such a rush, ignoring the warnings. You must be able to assist somehow. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.